stuck in Sheffield. So just to give you a little sort of kind of background to UKAN Plus for those who don't know it. UKAN Plus is funded by the EPSRC, Engineering Physical Sciences Research Council, and it has a remit to bring together the UK Acoustics Research community, across both academia, where I come from, universities, but also across industry, third sector, public sector, and other bodies as well. And that's its remit, and it's grown quite substantially. So it started off as just a network, 20 people back in 2017, then got funded as a network plus. And you can see we're up to about 1,600 members now, a lot from industry and a lot from academia. I can't remember the exact split, but 500 early career people in that. So we've got a really wide ranging membership, and it's really good because I think it brings together a community who think acoustics is important, but haven't got opportunities to talk together otherwise. Give you a sense of the sort of composition. I guess people, this thing's kind of aimed at is kind of the younger of this group, which you can see is kind of maybe 20% of the membership of UKAN Plus. But we've got a really wide range, as I said, in industry, in academia, and elsewhere. And what we work on is networking events. So if you're not already involved in SIG events, you should get involved in those as well. We run early career orientated events, and this is the first one of this year. We've also funded research projects, so there's calls out for research projects for pilot studies. We just recently had a call out over Christmas time, roughly. We've got 23 networking events organised up until October, and we've got 3 pilot studies. I wasn't at the meeting on this week, so I didn't hear about them, but obviously 3 have been funded to go forward, and we've already funded some in the past. If you're an early career person, we have a budget to support activities. So if you've got ideas for things you want to do, you could talk to people like Simone about ideas going forward, what would be good to help you. And we've also got future money going forward to support more projects in terms of pilot studies, which will come forward in future calls. So one of the nice things about this, we have budget to do things. So if you've got an event, something would be good to put on. If it's an early careers thing, talk to some of the early career team, of which Simone might probably be the obvious one to pick on to start with, about possible events. And if you want interest in pilot studies, look out for future calls that will come later in the year. I'm not exactly sure when that call will be. So what this event is about trying to look at kind of future, where's the future? And, I'm not quite the past of acoustics, but I'm heading that way. I'm not the future anymore, certainly. What was that phrase? Was it Cameron who said to Blair, "You were the future once," or something? That was a very famous put down. Yeah, you can say that to me. So you are our future, and hence it's really important we support you to stay in acoustics and develop a great career. We're looking at kind of where we take it next, and of course working with acoustics is going to be an important part of that, and looking possibly at also funding extension. So that's where UKAN Plus is going. And go on the website, acoustics.ac.uk, and you'll find lots of kind of stuff up there. Get signed up if you're not already. You'll find where the funding and the events is going. I actually didn't look at this video because I've got this on my phone. I don't even know what's on this video, but there's a video to watch. Any idea?
Yeah.
Just a general introduction to UKAN Plus.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So you can hear Kirill talk, which would do a better introduction to UKAN Plus than I do if you go to the video. So that kind of gives you a sense of what UKAN Plus is all about. So please join in and get involved. I mean, one of the things I'm going to talk about in careers is the importance of doing things just beyond your immediate thing. So getting involved organising stuff as an early career researcher looks great on your CV. I'm sure other people will say that kind of thing as well. It's not, so I would recommend that as well. Has anyone got any questions about UKAN Plus? Otherwise, I might move to the next talk.
All right. The one that opens immediately.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll move to the first talk. which is me.
May I just add that we're very grateful for the involvement of the Institute of Acoustics in our event today. And we'd also like to acknowledge the assistance of the network manager, Zoe Hunter, who's been brilliant. Yeah, Trevor.
Keep filling, Simone. You're doing a great job filling in that point.
Oh, you already have the other one.
Things are first things first. Get into this chat on.
Yes.
Trevor's
going to talk to us about his career path from a PhD in, a degree in physics, all the way to being the head of the acoustics research group at the University of Salford. Thank you, Trevor.
So I'm not sure how these sessions are going to organise, apart from I've been asked to talk for about 20 minutes and then have 5–10 minutes for questions at the end. But feel free to interrupt as we go on, and hopefully Roy will notice and can ask if anyone puts anything in the chat. I thought it was useful to start off with by kind of just showing you what my career basically looks like if you look in a sort of a traditional sense. So I did a physics degree. I then did a PhD actually at Salford. I did a postdoc, only a year of one. Went to become a lecturer for a couple of years working with Bridget Shield down in London. And I came back to Salford and I've stuck there ever since and gone through a lot of promotion. So I've had a really traditional sort of kind of academic career. And it's not a bad way of doing things. And it's been a very enjoyable career so far. If I was going to look in and I was starting from the beginning again, one thing I would sort of kind of think about is maybe slightly longer period as a postdoc and doing a fellowship. When I look around and meet people at conferences who people say, this is the real leader in this area, you find they've been given a 5-year fellowship to devote to one subject and really learn about the subject. As soon as you get onto the lecturer bandwagon, you're always shuffling and juggling teaching versus admin versus research. It's harder to sort of kind of get that sort of kind of devoted time once you get beyond. And if you're just a postdoc on other people's projects, you're always changing subjects. I'm looking at Will here, who's just done clarity working on hearing aids and before was doing other stuff. And it's great experience, but you're not driving your own research area. So I think if I had my time again, I'd probably get a fellowship in there if I possibly could. But I have had a fellowship, and I'll talk about that in a little while, but it's a bit different. And I actually thought, rather than talk about the traditional sort of kind of, possibly get rid of that top thing on the other slide. Kind of annoying, isn't it? Because I've used the full screen. No, okay. I'll fill in what the top thing is. Anyway, there's the 5 Ps of research. These are sort of things you need to think about if you want to get a career in academia. But I'm not going to talk very much about that because we've got other academics talking, who I'm sure will talk about the more typical things around research and teaching, which are all really important for a university perspective and getting a university job. I'm going to talk about my public engagement work because that's what makes me a bit unusual, and talk about how you get a career in that kind of beyond that. But what I would say is that I hit all this kind of stuff already. So people talk about how do you get time to go and do radio and stuff like that. It's because I bring in a lot of research funding. I have all the 3–4-star papers that I could possibly want. I had PhD student. I do things which give me esteem, like being a convener on an ISO committee. I create impact. My stuff goes into standards. I think my students are happy with my teaching. I'm looking at the student who's in the room. I'm wondering whether he's going to be in my lecture this afternoon now because he's here. And obviously I do leadership stuff. So all that, feel free to stay here, by the way, catch up recording. But I do all that. But one of the great things about being an academic is if you can hit these kind of targets, you do have scope to set out things that you want to do. And that might be a particular area of research that you want to dedicate time to. It might be something to do with teaching development, but for me, it's been public engagement and putting acoustics out to the public. And as provided you hit what the university wants, which, to be honest, is a lot about income, then they'll let you run with lots of kind of ideas. So I'm going to talk about my life in public engagement and let the others talk about their life in academia and a career. No, I can't. No, the mouse won't get into the right screen. Be there, mate. There. So let's ignore that. So, as I said, one thing I've done is a lot of public engagement. This is my list of EPSRC funding. And one of the things I'm going to talk about, if you want to make a career in partly doing this as part of your academic life, is university wants to justify you doing it. And it's very hard to do anything more than just do occasional events if you don't bring in funding. So this is my list of grants. All the red arrowed ones are actually public engagement work. So actually, I've consistently brought in money around public engagement. And so the university says, you know, why are you going to go and do this festival? You say, well, it's funded under this project. It's paying for my time. So even though public engagement is often something you do on the side in the spare time, if you really want to do a lot of it, you really probably need to bring some resources in to kind of actually justify doing it in the university. But it's actually fine just to do it. It's a little thing you do alongside, do occasionally a few times a year. There's nothing wrong with that. But I'm talking about if you want to really major in it. So why do I do it? What's my vision for public engagement? Well, I'm interested in getting the public involved in two-way conversations. So why should we care? Well, we know acoustics is a subject that's not well known. So we want to make sure people like school pupils know about a career in acoustics. They know about, they can study this. I'll go on to do a career. I think because we're working in a field where sound is important, the end goal of acoustic design is often about making things sound better, like not listening to the sound of the cafe outside next to this curtain, for example. So making people more sonically aware, including maybe the architects who designed this auditorium, would be a good idea. It should inform research. It's really important. So if I'm working, I've got a couple of hearing aid projects at the moment. It's no point me as someone who doesn't have a really severe hearing aid deciding what hearing aid users want. I need to be talking to that user group. So it's really important our research is involved by the public, but it's also important that we inform the public. And the reason for that is that big list of money is all taxpayers' money, which I had on the previous slide. I'm being paid by public. My salary is publicly funded. You should know what I do in my research. I should be doing it in private and pretend it's my fiefdom. You're paying for it collectively. You should know what it's about. And ultimately, it'll create impact. That's why you reasonably do it. Now, if you're really interested in getting involved, you should read things like the UKAN's vision for public engagement. And that's really interesting. I mean, a lot of it's not that surprising. And you would have seen stuff about it. And some of it is challenging what public engagement should be. And I think the one thing I would point out is this idea that public engagement needs to be reaching groups who don't get normally met by science. So I could go out this and go and talk to a grammar school in a wealthy area of Manchester. They have lots of scientific social capital around engagement. So I should be also going to schools that are in areas which struggle to get scientists to come in because they've not got that sort of kind of parent group of scientists already kind of coming in doing stuff. The other thing you'll see, and the other you'll see as well, is that's the citizen science which is missing at the top. There's a lot of interest in getting actual amateurs interested in science, and that's one of their visions about informing research. So this was an event I was involved in called So You Want to Be a Scientist. I actually was co-created this. It was a Radio 4 thing where members of the public suggested a scientific topic they wanted to investigate. They got paired with a mentor, and then the mentor worked together and they did a research project, and it was a competition. But it was, I don't know, for those who are old enough, remember the BBC got into a real mess about competitions and people cheating. It was like naming the BBC cat and calling it something else and that kind of thing going on. So we weren't allowed to call it a competition at any time, but it was basically a competition. And so we ran this and people sort of did real science and they presented it, and then they would get the winner who did the best science. And Ruth here won, nothing to do with acoustics. It was to do with snails. Yeah, so I judged on that and did various kind of things. But you'll see if you're interested in citizen science, and why might you be interested? Well, let's say generating data for machine learning, for example, that kind of thing. That's citizen science light. There are calls regularly out for doing that kind of thing in UKRI. But we're talking about the career event. So why should you personally be interested in it? Well, first of all, whether you're in industry or academia, one thing at some point you're going to probably want is a promotion. And it's really good to have a profile when you want to get promotion. If you're applying to whatever it is through a committee or through your boss, it's good if they think good of you. And actually going out there and having public engagement and saying, you know, I don't know, I went and did Infinite Monkey Cage at Glastonbury, which is what that picture is. People tend to be impressed. So it's good for your profile for promotion, although it probably never appears on any criteria, but internal politics is good for you. It's really good for improving your communication skills. So there's nothing like turning up and trying to talk to a member of the public and trying to explain science to realize you're not very good at doing it. And where that comes into an academic career is when we apply for grants. A lot of people who end up looking at grants are actually not in your area. So if you write a grant application for EPSRC, for example, you'll get refereed by experts in acoustics But then there's a panel which will have people in computational fluid dynamics of aircrafts and all sorts of kind of different things. And then being able to understand what the application about is really important. So being able to talk beyond your field is really useful for that. I found it really improved my lecturing skills. One thing it taught me to do is take risks in lecturing. I used to be really, here's my, like script for a lecture. I don't do that anymore. As I'm sure that, I turn up and wing it and it makes it much more interesting, because if you read a script, it's very boring. So it taught me to be better than that. It's fun. It reminds me why I become a scientist, because it's nothing like a member of public asking you, I don't know, what was the acoustic and I don't know, what get asked a lot, if a tree falls in a forest, does it make a sound kind of question, to think through some of the basic science that kind of intrigued you as a kid. And the other thing, it also broadens your outlook. So a lot of things about, if you're doing an academic career, is about interdisciplinary research. Most of the funding wants you to look broadly. And what happens in academic research is you get very narrow. Someone's described doing a PhD as like you fly out in a helicopter and you scan over an area to see what you want to do. Then you land and you get a teaspoon out and dig the most enormous, deep but narrow kind of hole, which you then bury yourself into. And so the equivalent of doing public engagement is to get back up in the helicopter and fly around and see what the general field is. Or maybe that should be drones nowadays rather than helicopters. Anyway, so, and you also get collaborators, as we'll see kind of in a moment. So how do you create a career in this area? It's all about developing your engagement skills. Networking is important in all careers, but it's also really important public engagement. So you need to sort of speak strategically about who do you want to get to know. So things like gatekeepers to audiences. So I'm doing the Cheltenham Science Festival this summer. If you have to organise your own event, you have to kind of publicise it, get an audience. Much easier to work with a science festival who will naturally have a big audience to bring along with you. So learning to, in the same way as you would in a normal career, networking to create those networks will help you out. Really important things I did as placements. So there are schemes to allow you to do placements in the media if you're interested. So I did a placement at the BBC Radio Science Unit and also at New Scientist. It's really important as well. And as I mentioned down there, I had a fellowship. I was a Senior Media Fellow at EPSRC, and that's the reason I did a lot of the media work. I had 2.5 days a week for 5 years devoted to media. So how do I find the time? It was funded for a scheme. And I just put at the bottom here, just out of interest, for those trying to justify it to the university why to do it. Every time you appear in the media, it has worth to the university. The University of Salford's Acoustic Centre last year delivered £1.7 million of advertising equivalent to the university, just by being on National Geographic or on the Today programme or whatever it might be. That has value to the university and value to us. And that's one way you can kind of justify the resource to doing it. So I'll talk about the 2 placements, which were really useful. And as I said, that was funded by a fellowship scheme, but the British Science Association has a fellowship scheme. There's a few things. So I did a placement at the BBC Radio Science Unit, and that led me to do all sorts of strange programs. Actually, this one was done with MediaCity, with Nick up in MediaCity. And one thing about public engagement I would encourage you to do, it does give you the most peculiar experiences ever. I literally did try and give up music for Lent, and I can tell you that's really hard to try and do it. So if I come in here during the Lent period, I would have been wearing earmuffs because of the music on in here, so I wouldn't have to listen to it. There was occasion I went to do a talk in Copenhagen to the Danish Acoustic Society when I was in the middle of this, and they said, well, do you want to take to a restaurant? I said, you can take me anywhere you want as long as the restaurant does have no music. And that was my stipulation for what we had to eat that night. It was find a restaurant which didn't have any music, which was the most peculiar thing that they ever had been asked for. But I did find one, which is quite hard. So I did a month there, and then I've done about 25 odd documentaries at BBC Radio, and it's just a great learning skill. You work with producers, you co-create stuff, and you really learn how to communicate that way. So that's really crucial, but it also means that people in Radio Science Unit know me, ring me up to do stuff with them well. In terms of New Scientist, what did that lead me to? That led me to writing 2 books, but I've also written for a huge number of places like National Geographic magazine, Reader's Digest, all sorts of kind of different kind of places. But the books, if you're interested in doing popular science authoring, so these aren't aimed at academics, these are books where you've went to Waterstones, you'll find them on the shelves, they're there for the general public. There's a whole thing if you want to do non-fiction authoring. So I have a literary agent, you have to write proposals, you have to find mainstream publishers. So I'm published by Random House, which is a bit of Penguin, Bodley Head, which is a bit of Penguin Random House. So you know, it's done for a mainstream publisher or gets, you know, all sorts of things. I'm happy to take questions on that if you're interested in knowing more about it. But yeah, popular science authoring is it's hard work in selling a sound book, I would tell you, by the way. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. So what I would recommend, some things you might want to consider doing is, first of all, do lots, if you want to get into this, do lots of face-to-face stuff. So we've got a Meet the Scientist kind of event down here. This is at Tate Late. The left-hand side is a bit Manchester Science Festival. The two people on stage were opera singers I was working with. There's nothing like actually talking, like I'm talking to you here now, to see if what you're saying is right. You know, you stand in a sort of kind of a museum and chat to people about what these yellow and red things are doing, and they look at you blankly. You know you haven't kind of explained it well. So the first thing is get your engagement skills up by actually talking to the public. And if you do small audiences like this Manchester Science Festival thing, you can see the white of people's eyes. You can see when they're bored. You can see when you're not kind of reach them. Lots of that. Again, I would go through things. I'd find festivals that had talking events. Height of Science is a good one. I bet you if you're in a university or university orders college visits, Meet the Scientists are standard events in museums. There's lots of places to get experience. So if you don't do it and want to get into it, start doing some activities. But what I would say with all the public engagement, it's easy to go along and just do them and have fun. But what I would think about is, what are you trying to achieve with this? And this is true of all careers. What audience are you trying to reach? So, you know, who do you want to reach, and what's your key messages? So what am I trying to tell this person who's wearing, and this person who's wearing this device? Why are they wearing it, and what they're trying to learn about acoustics? And so there's key messages. I mean, I think for acoustics, is one thing is to talk about how you might study acoustics, for example, to a particular audience, that kind of thing. There's other low barriers to entry stuff to do. It's really easy to do online stuff nowadays. Very hard to get an audience. So you can put stuff on YouTube. It's quite a whole TikTok or whatever platform, Instagram. Actually getting people to see it is a harder problem because there's so many people around. But things like blogging, editing Wikipedia, podcasting, is all things you can do, and no one's going to stop you doing it. So it's quite a good way of getting going and getting some feedback on what you do, even if you only get an audience of 5 people for your blog. That's 5 people who've read it and give you feedback. And so I would recommend doing some of this sort of kind of low hanging fruit to actually get going would be a good thing. So the other thing I've done a lot of is media work, as I've kind of indicated, and it started off with this duck. This is Daisy the duck. Now, someone pointed out, the funniest thing about this picture is the microphone isn't plugged in, but there we go. It's not a radio mic. Anyway, so the story of this was there's a myth that a duck's quack doesn't echo, and British Science Festival was coming to Manchester, and we just did a really stupid news story about the fact that it does echo. So we recorded the duck in here, and then we recorded it in the Rev Room. And the thing which was really interesting at learning about this was, first of all, working with the British Science Association, because they had a press conference. They put me in front of, so they put me in front of all the science correspondents, and I said, surely no science correspondent is interested in this. There's papers here about curing cancer, and I'm going to be talking about a duck. So why did that get on the news? That picture editors loved it. And so as soon as you had a stupid picture of a duck in a coat with a mic, it didn't have the Christmas hat on, that was added later on. But you know, it just went around the world with these really stupid, really literally went round the world. And I ended up doing sort of my first ever media interviews with down the line, live into things like Radio 5 Live Breakfast, talking about ducks and quacks. There we go. And that's the first time I had the Daily Mail saying, why is this person wasting all this time with this research? That's the first ever time they commented on that one. Once you do that media stuff and get some experience, if you want to get media experience, by the way, as well as talking, go and do something with local radio and stuff like that, or do something on a podcast. Again, stuff which is not quite so much sitting online, talking to 1 million people down the line with Radio 5 is not a recommended first interaction, I would suggest. You'll then get rung up by the press because they'll know you. So television, radio, newspaper will ring up and say, can you comment on this piece of news? You know, I've got this kind of, someone's just done an article about how the world's getting noisier or something. Can you comment on their research? And I do this quite often, though less now because I do less media work. I'm less well known. And yeah, you need to react quickly. You need to get pithy sound bites out there if you want to actually get into those articles. You need to be careful about what you say because it will get repeated. So don't go off piste. And the other thing I'd recommend is find out why the article is being done. What's the angle? So what you don't want them to do is a kind of, let's say a typical, I'm sorry to be rude about Daily Mail if you like it, Daily Mail hatchet job on something, trying to prove that, you know, something causes cancer that doesn't. It's the kind of thing they like to do. And they'll use your quote to give reinforcement to a missed story. So you need to talk to the journalist about what the story is about as well. But yeah, that's a really good way, again, of getting your name out there. So other things I've done, I'm running out of time, so I won't talk for too much longer. Got involved in things like internet stuff, like the worst sound in the world. So this was an online experiment. Loads of people now with COVID have had to run online experiments. I was there at the start when sound cards were new into computers, running some public engagement. And this story went around the world. This was a really big news story, reached millions of people around the world, doing really crazy things like interview Australian radio in the middle of the night, happening after these stories. It's just really got crazy time. This is my press officer pretending to vomit because the worst sound was vomiting. He left the university. I don't know if that was resulted to that. But one thing I would like to say is, so this was a big news story. One thing you learn, which you don't realise with a lot of this, the unintended consequences. So one of the unintended consequences is this paper on event-related potential study into horrible sounds. And you notice I'm the second author there. And that was someone who saw my work and said, oh, you know, these horrible sounds you're doing, should we play it to people while we measure their brain response and see what happens? And I ended up getting a neuroscience paper that I never knew about. So the thing is, you think about trying to develop networks, getting in the mainstream media, of course, everyone reads mainstream media. So you actually will reach a certain number of people, experts, as well as the general public. And so that's one thing I've kind of learned that's kind of really useful. And just to finish, because we said we're going to have 10 minutes of questions, I'm nearly running out of time. The one thing that I would say about public engagement is you kind of think about, obviously I'm kind of towards the end of my career. I've got a bit of time to go yet, but I'm further into my career. I'm further into my career than at the end of my career. When I look back on what I've done, the things I remember, the public engagement stuff, you know, I'm very proud of the research I've done. I'm very proud of the people I've taught. You know, it's great to meet graduates who are doing well in the industry. But actually, when you look back at it, the things people remember are things like this. And so it is really, you get to do the most unusual things, you know, like giving up music for a whole month, which was hell. Don't do it, by the way. But, you know, here is me playing the saxophone in an oil tank in Scotland, which also gave me a world record. And it kind of really kind of funny sort of things to be doing, but they really are memorable. So I would recommend getting involved if you like that sort of thing, because it's the sort of thing that you will remember when you look back at your career, what you've done. And yeah, a lot of fun doing public engagement. So that's me. That's my 20 minutes. I'm finished there. So I think we go into questions, don't we, Simone? Am I working on any public engagement? I do less of it at the moment. So COVID kind of killed it off a bit. So there's a couple of things happened. So one thing, my networks have kind of dissipated. So the radio science unit got moved to Cardiff and a lot of people left. So I don't know the producers very well. So I'm not getting rung up so much. But I'm also really busy as director of the Acoustic Research Centre, which is eating a lot of my time. And therefore, I haven't got time to really redevelop those networks. So the last big thing I did was the Stonehenge model. Some of you may have seen the model of Stonehenge, which was a big news story. So that's the last, you know, so I've done bits of television. I did that, you know, BBC Radio last week or a couple of weeks back on that. So I'm still doing stuff, but I'm not doing major stuff. I'm doing Cheltenham Science Festival in the summer. Good example of networking there. So Marika, who runs the Cheltenham, who's now director of Cheltenham Science Festival, was in public engagement. I can't remember her exact job at the Manchester Science and Industry Museum. So she rings me up and says, we're doing a couple of events on acoustics. One's about the voice, one's about ASMR. Would you chair them for me? Because she knows me. So that's kind of, you know, there's this network you get to be known. So I'm doing the Cheltenham Science Festival in end of June, which is, you know, mid-June. That's the big one in the country. So that's the sort of kind of the flagship one to do, even though it's in Cheltenham, which seems a strange place for a festival, but it's the flagship one, apart from maybe the British Science Festival each year. Antonio.
So how did you go and start doing this? What was your advice? You're an early career. How did you go and start?
So how do I start? Yeah, by the way, the talk is later because we're down the line. You must remember to repeat the questions, otherwise I think it won't work down the line. So to start, I would just do something but I would try and work with someone who already does it. So a lot of my researchers end up doing it with me because obviously I go and do events and they come along and help. And then the reason I say that is because there's a risk that you say, let's say a typical thing happens to a colleague, their son or their daughter's school says, can you come in and do an hour on acoustics to the primary school? It's the kind of thing you get asked to do. The risk is you try and reinvent the wheel and you go, well, what can I do? What demos can I do? And you spend ages kind of designing them. There's loads of stuff out there will tell you exactly what you need to do. So go and find the colleagues or the people in the IOA, talk to the IOA STEM committee about materials, and you'll find there's loads of, the hour thing I did at school which works really well is this, and you can steal it. So the difference between research and public engagement, unless you're looking for funding from certain routes, you don't need to invent something new. You just need to use the best things and do it properly. So the first thing is just go and do it. People have done things like Pirate and Science, get involved in things like that. In a fairly low bar to kind of do, to get experience, but also make sure you're finding out how well it's working. So we did this training for UKAN Plus, all about sort of kind of public training last year. And one of the key things is evaluation. So the risk is, and there's lots of evidence, is people go to schools, for example, do a talk that you end up putting off people from engineering in some way. I've been in school visits where a group has come in and I've seen a colleague, not an acoustics, I should emphasize, and I think this is a car crash, and it does happen, and they're well-meaning, but they're not doing it well. So get some feedback, and that can be a colleague who's in the room with you, giving you some nice, honest feedback. If it's a school group, it could be talking to the teacher afterwards, saying, how well did it work? Am I doing this right? So that evaluation all the way through is really important. So if you do it, I'm looking at you and you're nodding at me, meaning I'm answering your question. Look at people and see if they're bored, and is it actually kind of working? I'm kind of talking at you, good to ask them questions. There are formal evaluation processes as well.
You said that they say training is part of
So UKAN Plus did training last year. There's probably going to be some call for pilot studies. We're just trying to work out. In fact, it's a question for the early career researchers we haven't yet gotten through, is what would you like to support to do more of this? What we're trying to do with UKAN Plus in public engagement is not do lots of little events which are disconnected, but try and do something which has a legacy to it. So it's if you're just trying to learn to do public engagement, it's great to do lots of different things. But if you're trying to make a strategic change to what happens, you need to do things like repeat events and getting messaging right and stuff. So there will be a call out on something, but we haven't kind of quite worked out what that will be.
Actually, this is a question I want to ask. Whether you've ever had any ever collaborated or collaborated with other things.
Have I ever collaborated? Well, that picture of Glasgow, there was Brian Cox was on the stage. It's quite amazing seeing the Brian Cox effect. So I've done Infinite Monkey Cage 3 times, and there are Brian Cox groupies around. And it is quite amazing. So in Glasgow, you turn up, and the record was like 10 o'clock in the morning in Glasgow. It was the day after Brexit vote, which was quite peculiar. He told me he was very confident in the hotel the night before that Brexit wasn't going to happen. That was quite funny in the morning afterwards. But yeah, you get this flood of 3,000 people into this tent in Glastonbury to see Brian Cox. It is quite phenomenal. So I've done bits Infinite Monkey Cage. I've done stuff on Radio Manchester with him years ago when he wasn't quite so famous. I haven't done anything recently with him. Yeah. So yeah, it is quite a phenomenal to meet a real famous scientist. Yeah. Go on, Josh.
Engagement events that you really regret doing.
Oh yes, I can tell you a really good. Yeah. So when you do a book, you do a publicity tour, and so you go around book festivals. Some of the great. I've done Hay Festival. I've done the Edinburgh Book Festival, I've done the Cheltenham Book Festival. I mean, I've done all the major book festivals, which is great because you're reaching an audience which is not a science audience. These are literary audiences, so they're great to do. But you also get to do music festivals because my book was about sound. So I did all sorts of kind of different music festivals, which was fun. But one of them was Festival number 6 in Port Miriam, and that was an absolute car crash. So Port Miriam is quite a long drive, so you drive 2.5 hours to get to it. It was the first. Imagine tomorrow suddenly was sunny and 20 degrees. No one wanted to stay on the outside stage listening to everyone. Everyone was sunbathing, and they had no announcement about what was happening on each stage. I hadn't put any posters up. And the person introducing me wasn't my publisher, went on stage, and instead of doing what you need to do, so people are scattered around having drinks, you need to say, look, it's a great talk, come nearer, come listen. He just said, here's Trevor Cox. So I walked on stage, about 3 people in deck chairs in front of me. And I did, and of which 2 of them I knew. So that was even more embarrassing. And so I did it and did it as quickly as I could and left and just drove home. I was so pissed off. So yeah, that's one I regret. But I still on my CV say I've done festival number 6 at Portmeirion. So there we go, which impresses people. But now I've let the secret out, no one will ever more be impressed by me doing festival number 6 at Portmeirion, which is quite a prestigious one to do. But apparently it's quite common that they might have changed, that literally people aren't very happy with how they run it.
Just thoughts about getting experience. My experience over the years is I mentioned one of my children. I can't get away from being able to be their voice problems.
Oh, noise problems, I guess it's
And if you get the communication skills, you just have to do something then possibly with your parents, something like that. If you can talk to an aunt about noise and you're actually getting actual person. Tragic. Get used to talking things like that, and it's amazing the questions they ask. Oh, that's quite interesting. Even now.
Friends down the pub, yeah. I mean, so we were talking about pitching. I can't remember what it was quite talking about. You're pitching when you're talking to friends down the pub who aren't in science would be a good one. People often talk about 14, 15-year-olds being the sort of technical difficulty you're pitching at when you're talking to people. That sort of kind of level of language, 14, 15-year-olds is kind of typical. So yeah, it's got to work. And yeah, talking to people who are outside the field. I mean, I remember my first book, Sonic Wonderland, my mother-in-law took it and she read about 11 pages and then gave up on it, which was quite depressing. And so, yeah, it's quite interesting when you get people outside the field and you understand what puts them off and what doesn't put them off. Book writing is really interesting because unlike, if I write a scientific paper and it's in the area, you have to read it if it's a good paper. Yeah, even if it's written the most atrocious English ever. Whereas if I write a popular science book and you don't like it, you put it down, that's it, you don't pick it up again. So there's different hurdles to write. I should move on because it's now 1:45. I can't move it.